Productive Pastor 108, Managing Ministry Transitions. Welcome back, friends. Chad Brooks, another episode of Productive Pastor, the place where we talk online about healthy ministry through strategic productivity. And this is a timely episode, recording this in mid-June. Now, I'm not a Methodist. That means a couple different things, but one of the things it means is we move, and we know we're going to move. And I know that a lot of the folks who listen to this podcast are in the main line. A pretty good amount are United Methodist. But regardless of what's going on in ministry, very few of us will have the career like my own father had. My dad only was at 2 churches and almost 50 years of ministry, served full-time in the same place for 44 years, but had, I think, 4 different job descriptions over those 44 years. Ministry is going to change. Ministry is going to transition, and I want to handle that in this episode. Before we jump into the content, I want to let you know about something. I've got a special resource for you for this episode. So regardless of when you're listening to or what that ministry transition might look like, I've got a couple of things that can help you out, and this is how you can get to it. Go to the show notes, revchadbrooks.com/PPP/108. There's a sign up, or you give me your email, and I send you out several different emails with a couple of different things in them. Number one is I've got an ebook about personal ministry vision. I've developed this and used this over the last couple of years with pastors I've been coaching inside of transition and just creating ministry awareness and clarity. I'm going to send that to you. I'm also going to send you an approach document. That's the tool I'm going to be talking about a lot in this episode, and I'm just going to give you a PDF version of that so you can do that work yourself. But I encourage you, head over to the show notes, grab that resource, and let's buckle in for a conversation about how we manage ministry transitions. So regardless of, if this is moving churches or maybe moving new roles, I think transitions are the perfect time to develop an awareness of your leadership, an awareness of how things can change. There's just something there. And this is why I love transitions, and I love working with folks alongside transitions. I don't coach nearly as much as I have for the last couple of years, but there's a natural space inside of transitions to create personal change. And you know what? I'm in one right now. I'm moving from the weird bivocational space I've been for the last couple of years to working in full-time work as a conference officer in the Louisiana Conference United Methodist Church. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to go through these tools myself over the next couple of weeks, even though I've been in the job part-time for a year. I know with full-time work, but also some of the reasons why we're going full-time, that means things are changing. And so I'm not just like telling you the stuff that I did a couple of years ago. I'm going through it right now myself, because transitions are the perfect time for us to just develop personal clarity, to have a realization of change, and to make some changes. That's why I love helping folks think about, I use the language of competency all the time, but of competency development, because when you transition, people expect things to change. You might be going to a completely new place, or you might be taking on a drastically different new role. And that's the perfect time. Sometimes I think that if we try to do these things in the middle of a current space, it might get a little awkward. That doesn't mean you can't do it, but you don't have the ability to on-ramp this sort of stuff as quickly as you do when you're doing it inside of ministry transition. And really, there's just a couple of things that are going on with here. The first thing is identifying what are the things you want to grow in. What are the ways that you might have been aware that there is a lack of capacity or a lack of competency in something. If you think back to the conscious competency model, you might be in a known lack of capacity. A known incompetent. I'm giving my hat tip to the folks who always let me know, Chad, it's incompetent, not uncompetent. Incompetent sounds so mean, so I don't like it. But you might be in a place of known incompetency or incompetency. You say, hey, I've been aware of this for a while. I want to fix it. I want to grow in it. There's also some spaces, and so, what do you want to grow in? That's the fun stuff. There might be some places, what do you need to grow in? If you're expanding your role inside the same church or the same nonprofit or the same organization, there's some stuff that you need to. Hey, there's going to be some extra added responsibilities here. There might be some cultural values that might not be the most healthy that hey, I'm aware of this. I've heard this from other people. I see this, but you know what? I can't change it everywhere, but I can change it in myself. So these are some things I need to do. Or it might be in your personal leadership. You might just realize, hey, I've got some growing edges that I want to sharpen, and I know I need to sharpen. You might be changing ministries in a way that's really different. You might be moving to a church of a very different size than you've led before. You might be, especially I told y'all, this is not crazy United Methodist centric, but it is a little United Methodist centric. Maybe you're moving from having a couple of 3 churches in a combined part-time reality towards a single focus. Yeah, I'm used to 2 churches at a time or 3 churches at a time, but now I'm going to have 1 church. Or you might be moving from a rural setting to an urban setting, or vice versa, from an urban to a suburban. You might be in a cross-cultural situation. But if there's changes like that happen, there's have to be some things that you really need to pay particular attention to. And the last part about why transitions and why I think this sort of work is so healthy in transitions is you get to declare how you're going to make this thing happen. What is that's why I love the idea of the approach document and what that can mean. You might think about, how will I improve this? Or how will I approach this change? That's why I use the language of an approach document, because it's all about declaring these things before you get into the scenario. And so you get to make some decisions about how you will do things and how you won't do things as you step into it. So, second part of this episode, and this final part of the episode, we're going to walk through the approach document, walk through what these questions are. And I developed these personally for myself at first. I talked about this a little bit in episode 14. But what I've also done over the last few years is I've had the chance to run these through other ministers as they are in transition and have been able to adapt those to iterate these questions a lot. So what I might walk through is the questions that this approach document asks you, and then a little bit about each one of the things. The first one is this: what are the basic assumptions you have about how you pastor? Everyone goes into ministry for different reasons. They're called in different situations. There's different parts of the job that made them want to, raise their hand and accept the call that they have. You have some basic assumptions, and especially if you've been in ministry for a long time, what you might find out is these basic assumptions tend to carry with you. The way I normally use this language is, regardless of where you might be serving, what are the things that are going to be the same? What are the basic assumptions you have? I've learned from me what a lot of my basic assumptions are is they are in teaching and they're in evangelism. If I go to a space that's going to need a deep, deep pastoral care or heavy, heavy administration, I'm going to have to focus in extra heavy on that. It's part of the transition I'm making myself right now is just learning to level up my administrative game. So what are the basic assumptions about how you pastor? The second question is this: what are your personal values? Now, these are somewhat related, the basic assumptions, but also the personal values. But this is the stuff that you carry with you from your own personal life that, regardless of the ministry context, is going to spill over into the ways that you lead and to the ways that you pastor. Identifying those personal values can be just absolutely huge. And the next section is this. There's a couple subsections to this, but what are the lessons that you have learned? So how have these things, these core values and these basic assumptions, just informed the rest of who you are? I know there can be positive and there can also be negative things. And so think through the positive side of this stuff. How has this allowed you to see, I'm doing a quote unquote under the word success, but where have you seen maybe ministry fruitfulness? That's a lot better of a word for it. Where have you seen ministry fruitfulness through these things? And also to talk about the negative stuff. Now you're going to bring in some things to this that have a level of negativity. For me, I think hard work, and I think bearing down, I think accepting personal responsibility, all this sort of things can be big parts of ministry, but I've seen the negative effects of me just assuming everybody else is going to have those same values and those same things. So be aware of the positives and the negatives of the lessons that you have learned. Next question we lead into is this: what would have to be true in order for this to be realistic? Now, this is the space that matters because it's the space where you start building off tasks, focuses. It's where you begin to start learning how you might make decisions and set priorities. And what we're doing in this area in some ways is before we have to make or have a difficult conversation early on, we already know how we're going to answer that. We also already know the things that we're going to have to bear into to see fruitfulness based off of those assumptions and values, and to not see a loss of traction or a lack of fruitfulness, if that sort of a thing. And so for mine, some of the stuff is pretty serious. My morning routine matters. I know I have to focus heavy on teaching others to do things, whether that's spiritual or practical, and not just assume by osmosis that stuff's going to happen. I have that under one of my negatives is I assume people are going to run and focus on the exact same things I naturally do. So think about what would have to be true in order for these things to be realistic. This is where we think about intention and not just on natural unknown ability, those unknown competencies if we go back to conscious competency. The next question is this: what will you do? This is where you're drilling down to be a little bit more practical. What will I do? What are the things that I'm going to do based off of these positives and negatives as I lead into this situation? The question after that is the same thing, but just a little bit different. What will you not do? So I've got a couple of things. I'll read some of my bullet points from when I did a couple of years ago. I'm still working on this current year, but what will I not do? I will not involve other people. I will not immediately volunteer myself. And I will not present things that are outside of the current capabilities of the leader in the organization. This is going back into I'll just let Chad do it, or Chad can do it for us paradigm. And then the last one, and this is one I think that really changed me over the last couple of years, is I will not have good enough relationships with people to not correct and work towards agreed upon standards. So much of this can be very personal, and so much of this is owning up to the ways you know you've made mistakes in the past. Another one I have on here from a couple of years ago is I will not enter into pre-existing arguments between people. Those are things that might already be tense, already going on before you get there. You can't enter into, I learned this the hard way. I won't enter into pre-existing arguments about things. Next question is this: what will I build boundaries around and protect? This is very much personal things. For me, so much of my ministry has been teaching based, and so I will build it in time for teaching well. And I've also had to learn the intricacies of an extrovert who likes to do everything themselves about relationships. So I will build time for healthy, good relationships to be there. Next question is this: how do these core convictions lead to a healthy vision for life in ministering together? This is another space where, a lot of just processing over the known negatives and the known places of a lack of fruitfulness or faithfulness might have to happen. Next question: what might I need to develop more of to do this healthy? Now, I leaned into strengths language because especially 2 years ago, I was super, super big into strengths language. But now I even know more about myself, and there's other assessments that have provided a lot of personal clarity I might pull into. But also, I've learned a lot over the last couple of years, but I want to learn off of what I have learned from. And so thinking through this, and I love bullet points. I love to try, especially by this point in time, to be as tactical and as tangible as possible. The next is I start listing out my practical steps. These are the things I'm going to do practically. These are the things I know, and some of these are, very much known competencies that I have, but also the things I'm going to do to help move things from the unknown incompetency or moving from the known incompetency into known competencies. That's a big thing for me. And these practical steps are really just, you're kind of putting bumpers in the gutters in some ways with both the positive and the negatives. It helps you keep inside of the positive. And so maybe easy correctives that you're going to need to do to keep stuff in that based off of what's possible. And so that's it. That's the walk through the approach document. If you want to work through this, if you want to do this yourself, I know it's been a quick episode, but I've got this free resource for you. Make sure you cruise the show notes, revchatbrooks.com/PPP/108. Get this. Only that costs you is an email, and you'll get that ebook, you'll get the approach document, and some more practical stuff inside of that email sequence. But it's great to have you on for another episode. It's always a treasure of my heart to host this and to be the steward of Productive Pastor. Thanks so much. We'll be back next time.